Nice to see, looking out the windows, that I think Helsinki is a little bit darker than Riga. So I frequently think in Riga that we're the darkest city in Europe. Maybe about 10 minutes more daylight. So is my presentation on this folder here?
That's my memory stick, so we will not find the presentation.
So, I've entitled my presentation "The Future of Translation." I think that throughout the course of the day, particularly in the morning, we heard a lot about language barriers in Europe, about the importance of linguistic diversity, the challenge of linguistic diversity, the need to preserve multilingualism, and the different challenges and opportunities that this entails and opens up. And I think that we can pretty much agree that the way to overcome these language barriers is through translation, of course, which has once led Umberto Eco to state that the language of Europe is in fact translation. That translation is what we speak. But of course, when he said this, he was talking about human translation. But I think that, as was made clear in several presentations today, human translation is very limited in its ability to keep up with the vast amounts of content that are produced online. So online content is obviously booming, and there's absolutely no way that human translation could keep up with these great volumes. So therefore, what we've been speaking about today is automated translation as a tool to assist human translators, as Juhani pointed out in his presentation during the panel discussion, as a tool to enhance the process of translation. So the language that we're speaking today is a language of automated translation. And what I'd like to look at in this presentation is some different applications of machine translation, of automated translation, and different ways that automated translation is being used to engage people throughout the world. And the first use case I'd like to look at is e-commerce. In the e-commerce use scenario, machine translation is being used to engage customers, to engage consumers across Europe. It seems the presentation's skipping ahead here a little bit. So what's a classic e-commerce use case? So large providers, large global providers that want to sell their products and services throughout the world. The internet has given them the opportunity to do this. It's opened up barriers and physical borders no longer exist, obviously. It's given them the ability to ask their consumers to simply select your location and then choose your language, and here are our products. So what are some of the e-commerce providers that are using automated translation? Amazon, for example, has been a huge adopter, an early adopter of machine translation. eBay has been using machine translation more and more on its customer-facing sites so that its content can be translated in multiple languages. Not only descriptions of goods, but also content on pages where customers actually buy products and services. Airbnb, increasingly popular site for people to look for places to stay throughout the world, also using machine translation in different ways, which I'll show a little later in the presentation, precisely how they're using it. Etsy, also a growing e-commerce site where different craftspeople, so people can make their own goods and then use eBay as a platform to sell them. And because these people are coming from all over the world, they have the opportunity to also take advantage of machine translation to localize their own private sites on Etsy. And this has really helped Etsy expand beyond the United States, where it was begun, also to the European market, and machine translation has been a key part of their growth strategy. So how is machine translation being used? This is one major way. Obviously, people want to have descriptions of their products they're selling, and they want people to be able to read the descriptions of their products. So machine translation is one way this has been done. This is a screenshot from Etsy. You can translate the description of a product that someone has posted into your language. But one of the best ways, in addition to product descriptions, that e-commerce providers can draw people into their site is through user reviews. User reviews are not only a way for people to express themselves, but it's also a way for a site to get more traffic, to get more keywords out there. They use it as a form of advertisement. So people talk about their products, they say how much they like them, and it's a form of advertisement. So this is a key bit of content that these e-commerce sites want to be translated. Here's an example of someone who's bought these nice shades, saying that they're great, they're classic frames, and through machine translation we can see that this user liked it, and what this essentially is an advertisement for these frames. So because this content's provided by users dynamically, there's absolutely no way that a human could translate all this content. But at the same time, no one's going to be analyzing this description for its linguistic value or going to be analyzing it in terms of quality. Really what they want to see is, was it good or bad? And so the machine translation is very usable in this case. It's not a question of quality, it's a question of usability. Customer service. On e-commerce sites, the whole notion of customer service has been changing very radically. It's no longer the case that customers come with a question and have them answered by customer service representatives, but actually other users of the e-commerce site are helping to answer questions, kind of forming a community around the products that are sold. And machine translation helps facilitate this community because users can help answer one another's questions. In this case, a user posted a question in French that a user was able to read and then respond to in her own language. And so it helps to kind of mobilize this community to help one another. So machine translation becomes this tool to facilitate exchanges, and it also helps ease the customer service burden on the portal itself, because they don't need that many customer service people to be answering the questions. Airbnb, I mentioned before, is a big user of machine translation. They mostly use it, again, for reviews. When we look for places to stay on Airbnb, usually the first thing we do is look at how many reviews a site has. Reviews are the way that we can gauge whether an apartment is really what it appears to be in the photographs. The user reviews help us to get a sense of if this place is okay to stay. So therefore, what we're looking for is really positive and negative. That's the sentiment that we want to extract, so to speak, from a review. And machine translation helps users do that. So you can post a review in your own language, and then people can read it and see, is this place a good place to be staying or not? So Airbnb is a huge user of machine translation, and it's actually customer-facing sites. So MT has been used quite often in e-commerce, and increasingly more so. But I think there's a lot of parallels between e-commerce and e-gov. E-commerce aims to engage consumers across the world. E-gov aims to engage and empower citizens across Europe. So I think there's a lot of parallels, and not surprisingly, these are two areas where we've seen quite a bit of machine translation use. So as we saw in Kimo's slide in the morning, the number of languages in Europe, the official languages, are growing all the time. So therefore, in order to engage citizens, Europe and the European Commission, the European Union, needs to be able to address and to engage citizens in various languages. These are some of the goals of e-government. Increase citizen participation in e-government, reach marginalized groups of citizens, expand access to services, and also engage communities. So very similar to what e-commerce is trying to do. So the use case I'd like to present today is the way in which in Latvia we've built automated translation systems to help engage, enhance access, open access, and enable communities in Latvia. So what are the challenges faced by the e-government in Latvia? In Latvia, 36% of the population speaks Russian at home. Though Latvian is the sole official language of Latvia, there's a sizable proportion of the community that speaks Russian at home. Therefore, they're more comfortable in using these languages, using this language. So the challenge for eGov is to enable residents to use e-services in their native language. So though the content has to be provided in Latvian, the government has a huge incentive to reach them in the language in which they feel comfortable. So this is their challenge, number one. The second challenge was the Latvian language only has 2 million speakers, so even less than Finnish. We heard some of the figures this morning in Krister's presentation about the number of Finnish speakers. Well, Latvian, it's even more extreme case, just 2 million native speakers. So not a lot of people have access to the Latvian language outside of Latvia. And this is a problem for the government because quite a few of these residents live in Latvia, don't speak Latvian. How do we empower access to information for an expanded number of people in Latvia itself? How do we tell the world about what's going on in Latvia if so few people speak the language? So the way that we wanted to meet these challenges was with a comprehensive, large-scale machine translation service for the public sector. And this is a project that our company, Tilde, overtook over a number of years, building a large-scale machine translation service for the public sector that was not only built as a standalone service, but also fully integrated into government platforms so that users would have direct access to content in multiple languages. So how do we do this? Very briefly, though I can, of course, discuss this in more detail later. Because the Latvian language is very small, quite a lot of effort went into corpora collection, so actually gathering the necessary linguistic resources, so data for the Latvian language to build the machine translation systems. The texts were balanced with various language models to get the optimal results, so the optimal quality. Together there were over 100 million sentences of training data and quite a bit of public sector specific terminology which helped tailor these systems to the specific domains used in the public sector in order to raise the accuracy and quality of the translations. The result was a service that has since been called Hugo.lv. So Hugo.lv is the empty service used by the Latvian public sector. It's a secure service, so it's hosted on the government's own infrastructure, which was a major prerequisite for the system itself, that it couldn't be based in the cloud. It needed to be secure so that different government agencies and ministries could translate their confidential data, for example. Of course, it was adapted for the Latvian language, which was a big challenge considering the small size of the language. And it's also been integrated into various e-services and also government websites. We've already rolled out 3 language pairs, Latvian to English and English to Latvian. So this is primarily for the non-Latvian speaking residents of Latvia, as well as for people outside of Latvia that want to have access to government information in Latvia, and also Latvian to Russian to accommodate the Russian-speaking population in Latvia so that they can access e-services and government sites in their native language and in a language they feel comfortable with. So the main way that people interact with Hugo.lv is through our online portal. So it's an online translation site, similar to Google Translate in a similar look, where both government employees and also citizens can translate texts, documents, and also websites. So here we see a screenshot of a government legislative act translated from Latvian into English, and you can see here that the formatting has been preserved in the document, which is particularly important for legal acts, for legislative documents, where there's special pagination and paragraphs, and the system's able to preserve that so that it looks the same in its translation. It's also been integrated into the main e-services portal in Latvia called Latvia.lv. This is a site that consolidates all the various e-services, all the public services in Latvia, things like disability services, social security, pensions, information about schools, education, social insurance. All this information is in one site, and machine translation has also been integrated so that users can translate the information into either English or into Russian. Another thing that they can do is if they read the translations, they can suggest new translations. They can edit the translations, which helps the systems improve dynamically over time. So here we see how a user can select and see the source translation and actually edit it to improve it. And this is particularly beneficial in the public sector because there's several domains in the public sector. There's several different specific types of text, specific types of jargon, and different users of the site have different levels of expertise. And if they do see a translation needs to be improved, they can edit it, and the edits are fed back into the systems. So the systems are constantly a work in progress. So this is one way in which we can guarantee that the quality levels will improve over time. So in a nutshell, what HugoLV has been able to do for the public sector is enable multilingual communication and also empower access to information and e-services. And through use, as I mentioned, these systems have been getting better over time, and we're now proud to say that we've achieved higher levels of quality than even Google Translate. So the systems included there are better than Google, and are getting better with time. And this is something that Latvian residents, Latvian citizens have certainly appreciated, that their language has also been empowered with automated translation that's delivering higher levels of quality, and it's enabling them to communicate both with one another inside of Latvia and as well as with the rest of the world. So the Latvian government had another huge challenge just last year, and that was the EU presidency. EU presidency was hosted in Latvia in 2015. It was a big challenge, a big event. Over 25,000 people participated in the presidency. There were more than 1,500 special presidency events that took place throughout those 6 months. And lots of journalists, over 800, traveled to Latvia from 40 countries to cover the events. So when this challenge came up for the EU presidency, one of the first things that came to mind was multilingualism. All these people would be coming to Latvia. The presidency asked itself, how are we going to communicate with these people? How are we going to enable them to unlock Latvian? How are we going to enable them to find out what's going on in Latvia? So what we had already developed was HugoLV, and what we offered them was to adapt Hugo for the EU presidency so that it could be used for this particular event, so used much more broadly. So we opened up the scale of HugoLV and adapted it for the EU presidency. Of course, the systems themselves needed to be modified substantially to be used in the presidency. And the way we did that was we analyzed presidency terminology, so the names of different people involved in the presidency, different titles, different presidency-specific topics, policy topics, and these were added to the system in order to adapt it to the presidency as well. And then we taught the MT these new terms, and also taught the MT how to use the terms in the right inflectional forms. So the result of this adaptation was the EU Presidency Translator. Of course, the Presidency Translator, people coming to the presidency had different needs than people using public sector e-services. So we had to also build tools that could help the presidency visitors access these texts. So what we built was a desktop application. It's a desktop app that people could download on their laptops in order to read texts, read documents, and read websites. We built a mobile app so people could translate also on the go. And then finally, we built a translation kiosk, so an actual physical translation station for the headquarters of the EU presidency, where most of the people were gathered. So we built 3 distinct tools to help people use the presidency's MT systems. This is a screenshot of the desktop app. It was freely available for download. Presidency visitors could download it on their desktops, on their laptops. So when they got a document, for example, a press release, they could easily translate it into English. Or if they wanted to do research about a particular topic in Latvia while they were visiting, they could use the website translator to translate Latvian media sites. Or if they simply wanted to translate a text, they could do so easily right from their computers. Here's a little screenshot of how the graphic user interface looked. And this was freely available on the HugoLV site. was also installed on all the computers in the media center, so the journalists could use it. This was one of our prime user groups for the presidency translator. 800 journalists traveled to Latvia, and they needed to be covering events, so we had it installed on all the computers there. The mobile app was actually quite popular as well, and it was specifically among the delegates who came to the event. They were able to download it on their mobile phones. Well, this was the headquarters of the EU presidency. I'm not sure if anyone here had a chance to visit Latvia during that time, but this is the newly unveiled Latvian National Library. That was also the headquarters of the event where everyone gathered. So this was the site of the translation kiosks that we developed. And this was an interesting case actually for us, and that's why I wanted to conclude with this and speak of it specifically, because we think it's an interesting example of what we like to call translation as a utility. So mobile apps, desktop apps, these are exclusively available to people on their computers, but we felt that translation needed to be opened up a little bit more and made it even more available. So the physical kiosk was a way to make it more available to a wider group of users and to almost enable translation as a utility, so as a kind of a basic fundamental tool. And the kiosks were situated actually at the media center in the library, so that journalists coming through could use it easily. So this is the first thing they saw when they came in. They could immediately plug in their flash drives and translate the materials they needed to translate. It actually became the subject of several media reports. People liked the idea of having a tool to help them unlock Latvian and read the websites and find out what was going on. And we also had a big translation kiosk right by the entrance of the museum, of the Latvian National Library, so that when the delegates moved in, they could check it right away. And this also was the source of a lot of discussion around multilingualism at the library. So it sparked a lot of discussion about the role of languages and the tools to access languages. And one of the prime ways that it was used was to, like I said, review websites and see what was going on in Latvian media. This is an Italian journalist who was doing a story about Latvia. He was set to interview the mayor of Riga in the afternoon. And what he was able to do with the tool is look at the website, look at the Latvian news portals for that day, and find out what the mayor had said in the news that day. And so he was able to write down additional questions. And actually, when he did interview the mayor was quite surprised to know that he had followed along with the media for that day. And I was a little thrown off guard by his questions, which I guess was good for the journalist. So it allowed him to access text that otherwise he wouldn't have been able to see. Well, the concluding event for the EU presidency was the Digital Assembly, which took place in June. It's a high-level event, gathered quite a few high-level European Commission officials. Multilingualism became a big source of debate, thanks in no small part to the EU presidency translator and the translation kiosk. So we were quite happy to see that even in the opening remarks at the Digital Assembly, Robert Madlin, who was the former head of the DG Connect and now is the Chief Innovation Officer for the European Commission, accented multilingualism in his speech and stated that there would be actually no digital single market without multilingualism, as few people feel comfortable operating in their second or third language. He also went on to say that there were, to include multilingualism and increase considerations for linguistic diversity as one of the 4 elements that were necessary for the take-up of the DSM. So we like to think that the translation tools that were available during the presidency, the translation kiosks, helped spark debate about multilingualism and help bring it to the forefront of the agenda at the Digital Assembly. What it was able to do as well is spark the nomination of these tools of Hugo LV for a World Summit Award. So we were happy to see that following the EU presidency, Hugo LV was nominated for a World Summit Award in the e-government category. That was not only good for the Latvian public sector, but we think also an important step for automated translation and language technology, because it brought it not only to a source of debate in Europe, but also brought it to a major topic on the world stage as well. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. So, you can stay
I'll stay
on the
here.
stage because you are chairing the next panel.
Yes.
Jos voisin pyytää